Welcome to Paranormal Nightshift, your home for everything that goes bump in the dark. Here, your spine-chilling encounters take center stage, and tonight, we have a story that will make you think twice before ever touching a Ouija board. Tonight's fan-submitted tale comes from Zebbie, and it's titled Ouija Board Encounter. Curiosity has a way of leading us into places we never intended to go. For Zebbie, it was just a game, something fun, something harmless. But what started as an innocent experiment turned into a chilling experience that may have been more than just a message from beyond the grave. Was it a warning, a protection, or something else entirely? But before we dive in, a quick heads up for all you night shifters out there. If you love the supernatural and want more paranormal adventures, head over to paranormalnightshift.com to grab a free copy of The Birth of Dimensional Desperado, the first ebook in our brand new series. Trust me, if you enjoy ghost stories, time travel, and the unexplained, you don't want to miss this one. Now, settle in, dim the lights, and prepare yourself, because this story will have you questioning what really lingers beyond the veil. I've always been curious, so I didn't think twice when the opportunity to mess around with an Ouija board presented itself. You'd probably think messing with things like that is not a good idea, but we didn't know better back then. The story I'm about to tell starts in New Zealand, of all places, a country that doesn't exactly have the kind of ancient paranormal history like, say, Europe or North America. Sure, there are stories, but not as much lore as you can point to. I guess that's because we're still a relatively new country. I grew up in foster care and bounced from house to house, family to family. One of those houses was particularly memorable, and not in a good way. It was one of those situations where many kids, girls and boys of mixed ages were thrown together under one roof. I shared a room with a girl, a kindred spirit of sorts. We were both fascinated by the paranormal, always searching for something we didn't quite understand. I don't remember exactly how we came up with the idea, but one day we decided to make our own Ouija board. I once saw something about it in a movie and thought it looked cool. We didn't have a proper board, so we used a mirror, just grabbed a Sharpie and drew the letters, numbers, and the typical yes, no, and goodbye along the edges. We didn't know the rules. We didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. We all were deeply curious and wanted to see if anything would respond. At first, it was just goofy. We introduced ourselves and asked the board for a name, but it moved around aimlessly, pointing to random letters. It didn't feel right, but it also didn't feel wrong. There was no real fear, just curiosity. I was about to give up when something in me clicked. I felt this overwhelming urge to ask about my grandfather. He'd passed away about a year or so earlier. It felt like something I needed to ask. I leaned forward, barely able to whisper, "Grandad, is this you?" And then, without warning, the planchette shot to yes. My heart skipped, and my hands got clammy. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting that. I couldn't stop myself, though. I started asking him more questions. "Grandad, I miss you so much. Are you happy?" The planchette moved again, but this time it was slow, deliberate. It didn't form coherent words. It didn't feel like communication at all. It just moved in circles, round and round the board. I asked again, "Grandad, what are you trying to say?" But it was the same gibberish, letters that made no sense, just a mess of randomness. And then it happened. The planchette started circling the board again, but this time slower, as if trying to gather its strength. That's when I felt this sudden surge of energy so intense that I felt like I would explode. In an instant, I was hit with a vivid flashback, memories from when I was a little kid, sitting on the floor with my grandfather. I remember him singing nursery rhymes to me. His voice was comforting. One song stood out. "Ring around the rosy." The memories rushed in, and I could almost hear him singing in my ear, the warmth of his presence surrounding me. Suddenly, I knew. That's what he was trying to tell me. I asked the board, "Is that what you're trying to communicate, Grandad? Ring around the rosy?" The planchette shot to yes with such force that I almost pulled my hand away. But before I could process what was happening, something else started. The bush outside our room, right up against the window, began to shake violently. It sounded like someone was banging it against the glass, rattling the window. I froze, my heart raced, my eyes darted to the window, but when I looked outside, there was nothing. No person, no wind. There was no reason for the bush to shake the way it was. The lights flickered, and for a moment I thought the whole house would go dark. But it didn't. It was like the room was caught in this strange, charged moment that I couldn't explain. And just like that, the board stopped. Completely. No more movement, no more answers. It was like it had suddenly gone dead. The eerie silence that followed was almost deafening, a stark contrast to the intense energy moments before. Without saying a word, both of us instinctively said goodbye, like I'd seen in the movies. We cleaned the mirror with a nail polish remover to remove the Sharpie markings, put everything away, and went to bed. I remember falling into a deep sleep almost instantly, with no dreams, which was odd because I usually had vivid dreams. But that night, nothing. The following day, everything changed. I woke up to the sound of voices, CPS workers. They told me that I had to leave right then. There were no explanations, and there was no time for questions. I don't know what happened, but I left and never returned to that place. It was as if the events of the previous night had set off a chain reaction, leading to this abrupt change. I didn't understand how everything connected. The Ouija board, the sudden departure, the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Things started to make sense until many years later, when I was in a relationship. My partner had been in the same foster home at a different time, just a few years earlier. And as we began talking, we realized something terrifying. Sexual and physical assault had been rampant in that home. And not just from the other kids. The same caretakers, the ones who had taken care of me, were responsible for my partner's trauma as well. The same ones who had been in charge when I was there. It was like we were living parallel lives, different times, same abuse, same room. I started to connect the dots. I wasn't there long, only 2 weeks, but it was enough time for me to avoid what was coming. I wasn't there long enough for them to groom me, but I saw it happening to the others. It was terrifying to think that I might have been in the same position had it not been for my grandfather. He was there somehow, watching over me. He saved me in a way I didn't even realize then. I'll never forget the sense of protection I felt that night, the energy that surged when the board communicated with me. I'm convinced it was my granddad. And maybe, just maybe, he saved me from something far worse than I could ever understand. Rest in peace, Grandad. Thank you for looking out for me when I didn't know I needed it. And with that, Zebbie, thank you so much for sharing your story. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support the show, consider joining us on Patreon. You'll get an ad-free listening experience, early access to episodes a week before everyone else, and exclusive access to all future journeys in the Dimensional Desperado ebook series. Not into Patreon? No worries, you can still support the show by subscribing to the podcast on Spotify and YouTube. And while you're there, drop us a comment to let us know what you think about this episode. Your feedback keeps us going. And don't forget, head over to paranormalnightshift.com to grab your free copy of the first ebook in the Dimensional Desperado series, titled The Birth of Dimensional Desperado. It's waiting for you, completely free. Now, do you have a paranormal story of your own? We'd love to hear it. Submit your story right here on Paranormal Nightshift. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, sometimes the past isn't as quiet as it seems.